Okay, so good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Tara, and I am here at UM as part of the Fulbright program. Taylor, who's on the call with me, and I are assisting with the English language program at UM, and we'll be here until December. So we have already met a lot of you, and if we haven't met you, we look forward to meeting you soon. We're really excited to be here in Maringá. And I'm joined this morning by Dr. Elerson Cestaro Remundini. I'm not sure, did I say your name right?
You got it right, yeah.
So welcome, Elerson. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes. So today we're going to be talking about special education topics. This is our second talk on this subject. I did send out a link to the recording for the first talk. So if anyone wants to watch that, if you haven't received it, feel free to let us know. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. So here's what we're going to kind of cover today. We're going to talk specifically today about some cognitive disorders. Elerson and I are going to discuss some of the interventions that can be used in the classroom to work with these types of students. And a lot of these things are really applicable not only in the classroom, but in any professional setting, right? So if you have coworkers, colleagues, friends, right, peers, I think a lot of these tips and tricks could be helpful in a lot of different settings. And then we're going to talk about some different case examples as well. And Elerson has a bunch of visual examples to show you. Can you guys still hear me, or am I frozen? Okay. All right. So I'm going to go over first a few of the categories that we consider when we think about different cognitive disorders. This comes specifically from my state, the state of Michigan. Most of these are recognized in the US as a whole, but I'm specifically talking about the terms that we use in the state of Michigan, which is where I'm from. So when we think about cognitive disorders, this really has to do with the brain, right? So something that impacts the student's brain in a way that makes it difficult for them to learn. So looking at some of the common ones, I think most people are familiar with autism spectrum disorder. So when we think about autism spectrum disorder, this really has to do with three pieces. So it's not only cognitive, but it also has to do with behavioral and communicative. So those are the three things that we look at when we're looking at someone who has a autism diagnosis. It's going to impact them not only in their cognitive functioning, but also in their communicative and their behavioral functioning. The next one is specific learning disability. Elerson is going to go more into this, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. But this is basically when a student is below grade level, right? Especially in reading, writing, or math. They're not able to perform at the level equivalent to their age and grade, right? They're performing at a level below where they should be. The next one is speech and language disability. The reason that I include this here, because speech and language, right, as a communicative disability is not only cognitive, because there are people who have some difficulties with pronunciation or articulation, which is more of a physical aspect related to their mouth. But the language component really can be cognitive. I think most people know language is produced in the brain, right? Language is where is processed in our brain. So in order to produce language, in order to comprehend language, that has to do with our cognitive functioning. So that's why I kind of included this category in this area too, because a lot of people don't think about the cognitive component that language has in language production. We also have what we call other health impairment. So under other health impairment can really be anything that's a medical diagnosis that impacts the student in their ability to learn. So one of the most common ones I think everyone is familiar with is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or as we say in English, ADHD. Let's see if I can get the Portuguese one right. T-A-H-D, no, T-H-A-D.
TDAH.
TDAH. Okay, I'm still working on that. So this is something that a lot of people are familiar with. This is a cognitive piece because, thank you, Jomar, because it does impact the student in a cognitive way, right? ADHD is specifically related to being distracted, sometimes being hyperactive, making impulsive decisions, and this all has to do with cognitive processing. And the last one, which is kind of more on the severe end, is a cognitive impairment. So this is similar to a specific learning disability, but different in that it's more severe. So this student has to be performing 2 levels below their grade level. We also can say this as they're performing in the 6th percentile. That means on standardized testing, they are in the lowest 6%, right, in reading and math. So they would have to fall into that category in order to be considered in this area of cognitive impairment. Some of the common ones that we see under this area are Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, developmental delays. I think a lot of people tend to think of these types of things when they think of cognitive impairment, but really it's any student who's performing at least 2 levels below their grade level. I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and Elerson is going to complement a little bit of this to talk more about dyslexia, which falls under specific learning disability. So I will stop sharing and I'll turn it over to Elerson.
Just a second. Can you see it, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about dyslexia. First of all, we need to bear in mind that dyslexia has nothing to do with borderline intellectual functioning, right? So it does not affect one's intelligence, right? So there is no cognitive impairment involved. So the intelligence of dyslexic people is preserved, right? Secondly, it's not true that they are unable to understand and express themselves, right? So they're totally able to do that as long as we don't impose written language as the only tool to do that, right? And why is that? That's because rather than a generalized limitation, dyslexia is a very, very specific limitation which has to do with reading, right? So this is the definition of dyslexia. It's a disorder manifested by difficulty in learning to read, right? So it's basically all about reading. Yeah, it does affect some other skills, but reading is the skill that is most affected by dyslexia. So people who suffer from dyslexia, they will have a lot of trouble learning how to read. Some of them will not be capable of reading. So they need specialized intervention. So they need the help. They need to be assisted by educational psychologists, because as teachers, like mortal people, we are not able to teach them how to read, because they can't learn how to read the way other people do. So they need specific approaches or methodologies to help them read. Okay. And this is a way that dyslexia manifests. Many dyslexic people, when they look at written texts, this is what they see, right? And as you can see, it's tiring, right? I feel really uncomfortable when I look at this. It's like laborious. Can you picture yourself looking at pages like for 5-10 minutes? This is really exhausting, right? It makes me dizzy. So most of them, this is what they see when they look at written text. Actually, I would like to share with you this link, which brings a simulation of how dyslexic people see a page. I've just sent the link to you. Can you just please access it? If you scroll down a little bit, you're going to see a text right after a picture. Can you see it, guys? So as you can see, the letters are like moving, changing places. So this is how many dyslexics, this is what they see when they look at written texts. So that's why they cannot read, right? That's why they are unable to read. It's not because they are lazy or they're dumb, or it's all about their brain, right? So as Tara said, our brain processes language, right? So language happens in our brain. So their brain operates in a different way, and which makes it difficult for them to read. So that's why they need specialized support. Okay. Tara, I think you have the floor now again.
Okay, thank you.
Oops.
Let me just share my screen. Okay. All right, so now that we've talked about some of the common disorders in the area of cognition, we're going to talk a little bit about some things that can be done in the classroom. And again, I know not everyone here is a teacher or an educator, but I think it's really important to know about these things. And I think, again, we're going to come into contact with people of different needs in all aspects of our life, right? Even if it's in our professional setting, in a work setting. So I think it's good to be aware of these things and know how we can be supportive of those who are different from us or who have special needs. So I want to talk first, this is specifically in a classroom setting, about modifications and accommodations. So what do I mean by these terms? Modifications really means modifying what the student is expected to learn or what the expectations are. And accommodations, on the other hand, refers to the presentation of the material. So when we think about modifications, we think about modifying the expectations. So for example, a student might not be performing at the same grade level for their grade and age. So we might modify the expectations. We might modify what work they need to complete, do alternate assignments. Maybe the grading is different, right? We might not grade them in the same way that we would grade a student with different types of needs. And then when we think about accommodations, it's really how can we make the curriculum more accessible to the student? So what can we do so that they can be able to access? So modifying is changing what they're expected to learn, and accommodating is changing the way that the information is presented. So some examples here, maybe presenting the material in a small group setting or a one-on-one setting, giving them extra time to complete assignments. A big one is that Elerson mentioned, for example, with students who have dyslexia, is oral administration of tests and assignments. So a student might not be able to read and write and respond to questions, but they might be able to hear the questions read to them and respond by speaking, by giving their answers verbally, right? Same thing with audio. They might be able to listen to a text and tell you what it was about. Even if they can't read it, this is still a way for them to be able to participate in the curriculum, right? It's a way for them to respond in a way that's more appropriate for them to accommodate their needs. I'm going to talk now about some do's and don'ts. Again, I think this is applicable not only for educators, but also in the workplace, with friends, in other settings as well. I won't go over the don'ts too much because I think they're pretty straightforward, but just some things here. I think peer buddies are really important. And again, this is applicable in a work setting too, right? If you get a new job or you get an internship, what are you going to do? You're going to have someone there training you, right? You're going to have a mentor who's helping you, assisting you in learning the role, learning the position. And this is really a similar idea, right? We have a peer buddy. It's like a mentor. They're not doing the work for you, but they're helping you learn what you need to do. They're helping you grow those skills to be able to do it on your own. So I think this is applicable in a lot of settings. We also like to talk about SMART goals. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the acronym SMART. We use this in English. Essentially, this means setting goals that are realistic, that are accomplishable, right? We don't want to set a goal that's not going to be realistic for that person. And again, this applies in different settings. Let's say you were a supervisor or a boss. You want to set a goal for your employees that's going to be reasonable for them to accomplish, right? You want to give them enough time, an appropriate deadline. So really setting reasonable and realistic goals is important. And then also thinking about the way that we present, again, the curriculum. So we know that there's different types of learners. Some of the most common ones that we talk about in English or in the US are kinesthetic, physical, and visual learners. I'm going to drop those in the chat. So what does that mean? I think there was a presentation from Tera, who was also in the Fulbright program, who talked about this. But when we think about kinesthetic, that means people who are hands-on, people who need to touch, people who need to do something to be able to learn. Then we have, auditory learners who learn through listening. I'm sorry, I missed auditory. And then we also have visual learners. Some people have to see something to be able to learn. So try to use different techniques that might apply to these different types of learners. Elerson is going to talk a lot in his presentation, especially about visual. Using visual aids is a really important tool, especially for people who have difficulties with reading and writing. Using pictures can go a long way in really assisting those types of learners. So I'm going to turn it back over to Elerson now, and he will talk a little bit more about this. You're muted. We can't hear you.
It's been 2 years since we started using this kind of tool, and I still haven't learned. Okay. Right. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So specifically regarding dyslexia, since dyslexic people have trouble reading, and since reading is a highly required skill at school, if they are not able to meet to the expectations, to the expectations of their teachers and family, school can become the place where they do not feel safe, right? So it's a place where they won't feel comfortable, right? Because and that affects their self-esteem too, because they see everyone around them can read, and they ask themselves, why is it that I can't read, right? Am I dumb? Why is it that everyone can, but I don't? I cannot. So I remember once I had this project, which was part of my doctorate research, and I had these 3 dyslexic students. And the mother of one of them, she told me that long ago, when her son was a kid, one of his teachers called him stupid in front of everyone in the classroom. Right. So it's ironic because school it's meant to help us build and strengthen our self-esteem. So when that happens, school is actually compromising it or even destroying one's self-esteem. Right. So dyslexia is not only a reading disorder, right? It can also destroy your self-esteem. And that's why, I mean, school emphasizes this limitation because reading is required by school, right? So that's why we need to adapt our teaching practices in order to minimize the impacts of dyslexia on our students' lives, right? We won't solve the problem, but we can at least make it, we can minimize its impact, right? So there are very simple measures teachers can take, and I'm not talking about only English teachers. It could be like history teachers, geography teachers. It doesn't matter, no matter the subject you teach. So we should always avoid time pressure. We should also avoid comparisons, right? Never be judgmental. We need to be supportive. We need to be there for them because they probably need us. They need us as friends more than anyone else in the classroom. We shouldn't force them to read out loud. I usually tell people that when you ask a dyslexic to read out loud, it's the same as asking them to take off their clothes in front of everyone, right? As Tara has mentioned, we should prioritize oral answers. She said that, yes, dyslexic people, they are not able to read or write, but it doesn't mean they don't know the answer to a question, right? So most of the time, they know the answer, they know the content, they learned it, so they are able to answer your questions, but it's just that the way we're asking them to do it is not the way that is suitable to them, right? So whenever it's possible, we should go for oral tests instead of written tests. I've met many teachers, like history teachers, geography teachers, who have replaced written tests by oral tests because they have dyslexic students. Okay, we should always highlight their qualities and abilities because it motivates them, right? We should constantly recap. We shouldn't like bury previous content. We should always review it because dyslexics have they have low memory retention, so it's easy for them to forget things. So we should make sure that we always recap. We bring back information so that they can remember them. Avoid having them copy content from the board. If it's inevitable, just make sure it's not too much, right? We should reconsider the need for homework or adapt it to their needs because, as I told you, school is a place where they might feel uncomfortable and not safe. So dyslexics usually have a hard time at school. And having homework means that they're going to have a hard time also at home, right? So as I told you, if it's inevitable to assign them with homework, we should at least adapt it. Like, so instead of asking them to read long texts, we can ask them to watch videos on the content we have been discussing in the classroom, right? Avoid using red pens for correction because it's a little bit aggressive, right? Never tell them things like study harder or you got to improve because actually they have been doing much more than they are capable of. And read the instructions of exercises and tasks to them. And finally, allow them more time for written tasks because a 20-minute writing task can take a dyslexic 2 hours on average, right? Because as I told you, their brain operates in a different way. It's not they are not lazy. It's just their brain working in a different way. Okay, Tara, I think it's your turn again.
All right.
Okay. There we go.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Elerson. Okay, so piggybacking on what Elerson said, here are a few other suggestions. He made a lot of really great ones already, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. One I want to highlight that Elerson already mentioned, it's important to build other types of skills for your students besides just academic skills, right? So it's important to build them up socially, emotionally, learning adaptive skills. What do I mean by adaptive skills? Some students have a lot of difficulty with daily life skills, right? Safety, knowing when to cross the street, Maybe they have trouble cooking, right? So there's a lot of different types of skills that we can encourage in our students that are not just academic. Elerson mentioned self-esteem. This is a really big one. I'm going to go more into that when I talk about some of my examples. It's really important for us to build up our students' self-esteem and confidence in themselves. I think also educating ourselves. And again, this is not just for a school setting. This is really in all different types of settings that we encounter. We really need to learn about differences in others. We need to educate ourselves about different types of special needs, right? It's important for us to interact with others to learn more. I think this is applicable to a lot of different aspects of life. Empowerment is something that I think is really important. I think Elerson has already touched on that a lot, but really not doing things for the student, but encouraging them, showing them the skills that they need in order to be able to do it on their own. One part of that can be self-assessments. So I think it can be very useful to allow people to assess their own progress. And this helps them to identify areas that they want to work on or that they feel they need to improve on, instead of us setting the expectations or telling them you should do this, you need to work on this. Let people be their own critics. Let people determine what their needs are and what their goals are that they have for themselves. And most importantly, sometimes you just have to be creative. Not everything is going to work for the same student. So it's really important just to try different things and find what works best. So with that, I'm going to talk about a few case examples here. So these are students that I've worked with. I did change the names to respect the privacy of the students, but I want to just talk a little bit about some case examples here. So Leonardo, a 14-year-old boy with a specific learning disability. The thing that I really want to touch on here is best practice number 2, which is teaching skills other than academics. So in this case, this is very similar to what Elerson already mentioned. This student thought that he was stupid, right? He made comments constantly. I'm not smart. I can't do this. So the practice that worked best with him was building his self-esteem. And as Elerson mentioned, he was a very smart student. And even though he had a learning disability, he really was very intelligent, but he didn't believe in himself. He didn't believe that he could do anything. And that's really what his biggest barrier was. It wasn't him not being able to do the work. It was him believing that he could do the work. So in this case, self-esteem building was really the biggest thing that helped him to be more successful. Uvalde, also a 12-year-old male with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. I think here talking about 4 and 5, and I'll go back so you can see what I'm referring to. I had to work with him a lot on organizational skills. Many people know students or individuals who have ADHD really struggle with being disorganized. So one of the things that we did with him was we did a weekly homework tracker. So every day he would get out his tracker, he would write down what he needed to complete for that day. And then at the end of the week, going into number 4, we would send that sheet home. His mom would sign it and would send it back to us at school. And again, I empowered him by having him do this on his own. So of course, the first time we completed the homework tracker, we sat down together. I showed him, okay, this is how it works. And then every week it was his responsibility to do that skill, to complete that activity on his own. He had to go and grab the homework tracker. He knew how to fill it out, right? So building up his own ability to learn those organizational techniques on his own and practice them on his own. All right, Alexa, 13-year-old female with autism spectrum disorder. There's a lot I can talk about here. I think I'll just highlight here number 6, which is self-assessments. Alexa really struggled with social interactions. She had a really hard time making friends. So one of the things we focused on was social skills. And I really allowed her to assess her own progress because she was so intelligent. She was able to really be self-critical and to notice what she was doing well and what she wasn't doing well. So when I did check-ins with her, I would say, oh, did you say hi to anyone this week? How did it go? And she was able to recognize, oh, this week I said hi to a friend in the cafeteria, and that felt really good. She was able to celebrate her small victories that way and measure her own progress towards the goals that she wanted to complete, which for her was making friends because it was really difficult for her. So that way she was able to see her own progress and to celebrate her own small victories along the way. And last but not least, Christopher, 10-year-old male with cognitive impairment. So for this one, I have best practice number 7, which is being creative. Christopher, because of his cognitive impairment, really struggled with language production. So to give an example, I would ask Christopher a question, and it would take him about a minute of just sitting there in silence to be able to process my question and process what he wanted to say to respond back. So it was very difficult to have a conversation with him because the processing time took so long that by the time he was ready to produce that language, I was already moving on to the next question. So something that I did with him, going to that side of being creative, was incorporated a lot of games into our activities. For some reason, when we were doing games, he was able to produce language more quickly. I think because maybe it was a challenge, it was fun, or there was less pressure because, you know, he didn't feel the need to respond on the spot because it was a game, right? So it was fun and he wasn't feeling stressed or, you know, like he really had to answer a question. So the game that I did with him was I had a Jenga, you know, most people know the game Jenga. And on each of the blocks, I put a different color. So we would take turns pulling out the blocks, and whatever color we got, we would answer a question. He would answer, I would participate as well, a question. And they were simple things, right? Like, what's your favorite color? Who's your favorite superhero, right? But these were things that for him, it was fun. It was fun because he was playing a game, he was playing Jenga. You know, it was fast paced and he was able to process things more quickly because he was enjoying himself, because he was relaxed, right? So I think sometimes you just have to be really creative and you have to try different things. And again, as I mentioned before, different things work for different people. So no one thing is going to work for everyone. So it's important to try to find what works best in each situation. So that's all I have of my part. I'm going to turn it back over to Elerson to wrap up for us, and then we will open it up for questions.
Okay, right. So now let's talk specifically about English as a foreign language teaching, right? So as English teachers in Brazil or in any other foreign country, we're supposed to address all the 4 skills, right? So reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So why is it that in Brazil, traditionally, school neglects oral production and comprehension? I know that from my own experience, because when I was 11 years old, I remember going to my first English class and I was so excited because I was going to learn English. But then after a few weeks and months, I noticed that I hadn't learned anything. I mean, all we would do in the classroom was just like filling in the gaps or doing grammar exercises or memorizing grammar rules. So we would never actually speak. Right. So I have this feeling, and many people have told me they feel the same way, that in Brazil, we don't focus on oral comprehension and production in the classroom. Right. And what does it mean? What is the impact of that on dyslexic people? Right. So dealing with written language, it's much more difficult for them compared to oral language. Okay, it's not that they're going to learn everything, like it's not that their performance is going to be like perfect dealing with oral language, but chances are that they will do better when dealing with oral language compared to in written language, right? And as we know, in Brazil, most teachers, most English teachers, they don't master the language. Those who do sometimes refuse to use it in the classroom. Textbooks do not privilege oral language. Exercises are usually reading-based, reading-centered, or grammar-centered. So oral language is like marginalized in our classroom, which is bad for everyone, right? It's not advantageous because after all, language was first meant to be spoken, right? So oral language precedes written language. And speaking is fun, right? Writing and reading is not, right? We have to admit. And when it comes to dyslexic people, it's even worse because, as you know, they have trouble reading, right? And there is also this extra factor, which is orthographic transparency or orthographic depth, which refers to what we call grapheme-phoneme relationship, right? So what is it? The more transparent or the more transparent the orthography of a language is, the easier is this grapheme-phoneme relationship, right? Grapheme-phoneme relationship is, the process of converting linguistic symbols, written syllables and words into sounds, right? This is a grapheme-phoneme relationship. So if we are dealing with a language whose orthography is transparent, this relationship it's simple, right? It's not difficult to convert written words into spoken words. But in languages in which this relationship is difficult, in which the orthography is opaque, it's harder for learners to convert written words into sounds, right? So let's compare here. You can see this vertical brown, what is it? Taylor, can you help me? We talked about it. Okay, right, this vertical bar. Okay, I got it now. As you can see, the more you see the vertical bar, the more transparent the orthography of a language is, right? So let's compare three languages here: Finnish, Portuguese, and English, right? So Finnish is considered to have a very shallow orthography, a transparent orthography. So that means when people are learning this language, it's not difficult for them to convert written words into sounds, right? So this relationship between written symbols and sounds is predictable. It's simple, right? Portuguese is like 50-50, right? It is a difficult, it is challenging to convert written words into sounds in Portuguese, in Brazilian Portuguese, but it's actually more difficult in English, right? So this is an extra challenge that dyslexics face, because it's not that simple to read a word in English and pronounce that word in an adequate way, right, with the right sounds, because it's not an easy relationship, right? So it's not that predictable. It's not as predictable as in Portuguese, for example. There is this research that shows that British children, it usually takes British children longer to learn how to read compared to children from other countries in Europe, like Spain and France and Italy. That's because, of this grapheme-phoneme relationship. Besides, English is also considered a language with a very complex syllabic structure, right? And this all means that teaching our students how to speak English based on reading is not going to work, because it's not easy to convert written words into sounds when you're learning English, right? So, okay, here I have a few examples for you. Letter A in English has 4 different sounds, right? There are words whose spelling is very similar, but their vowel sounds are completely different. On the other hand, there are words whose spelling is completely different, but they rhyme because they have the same vowel sound, right? So this is why it's difficult for dyslexics, not only dyslexics, but especially them, to learn English based on reading. Another example, the double O in English, it has 5 possible sounds, right? So if you teach your students English based on reading, right, it's very likely that they won't learn it properly, or they will make a lot of mistakes and they will feel demotivated, so they won't want to learn anymore, right? So instead of basing our lessons on reading, we should rather privilege oral language, right? We should also address oral language and not only written language, right? And that makes a huge difference, because if you focus only on written language and if you neglect oral language, it's very likely that your dyslexic students won't do well. They will their performance will be very poor, because oral activities are the chance they have, right, to reach an outstanding performance, right? So if it's all based on reading, they will fail, right, probably. If you focus on all the 4 skills, right, they will probably do better. And what if you address all the 4 skills, but focusing on oral language, right? Then their chances of doing well are much higher, right? And besides that, we should always resort to visual language and visual aids, because since they have trouble reading, we need to find other ways. As Tera said, we need to be creative. We need to find different ways to teach, right? So if written language is not the way, it's not the best way for them to learn, we need to find different resources. And there are simple measures we can take, right? So we can illustrate verbs, for example, by using pictures, because it helps them internalize much better, right? Since they cannot read, or they read poorly, if they see images, if they associate those images with words, it makes them retain vocabulary much more. You can also illustrate adjectives. These are the 32 adjectives I taught my students during the project, which was part of my doctorate research. So I would introduce the words by showing pictures. So throughout the whole project, they never read any written words. So it was all about images and pictures. So I would introduce a picture and tell them the word that was represented by that picture. And I would have them repeat the word many times, because as I told you before, they have low memory retention. So we need to make sure they repeat words and phrases a lot in order to internalize them. We can also use memes, right? I'm not sure whether Taylor and Tera are familiar with this Brazilian celebrity here, but we can use her pictures to address adjectives in the classroom. And this kind of resource has the power to engage students, because it's something they like using, like memes and internet language. Tera also mentioned kinesthetic teaching or kinesthetic learning. This is an example of that. I remember once I had this activity with my dyslexic students. We had been working on vocabulary related to jobs, occupations. So that day I decided to revise that vocabulary, job titles like secretary, teachers, referee, soccer player, and so on. So the students were blindfolded, and I would handle them objects, and they would hold the objects and they would touch them. And by doing that, they would have to guess what my profession was. So I would give them, for example, a microphone. So they would hold it and touch it, and they had to guess what it was. And consequently, they had to tell me what my job was. So they would have to tell me, you are a singer, right? Or you are a fisherman, or you are a secretary, depending on the object they were holding. Associations are always welcome too. And I remember this time when one of my students, I was introducing the adjective silly. And he said, teacher, it's like the word silicone in Portuguese. And I said, yes, that's it. So he made this connection between an adjective in English and a word in Portuguese, which was very helpful. And every time he forgot the word, I would just do, like this, and he would automatically remember the word. The same happened to this other adjective here, cocky, which is this hairstyle, the name of this hairstyle in Portuguese. We can also use symbols instead of words, like the play button to make them use the verb to play. Right? I play soccer, I play the guitar, I play video games. As you can see here, you can write a sentence without using words, right? We can write a sentence just by using pictures. We can also use the like symbol from Facebook to have students to tell us things they like or things they don't like. Another example is, I remember I was working on the verb to be with them, and it was really difficult for them to use the phrase "you are." They wouldn't understand the use of the phrase "you are." So I realized that I had to give them opportunities to say things about me, right? Because I was the you they were talking to. So I prepared some pictures in which I would have different jobs. So they would have to tell me what my job was. Like in this one, they would have to tell me, you are a doctor. This one, you are a teacher. I also used adjectives. You are rich, for example. There were like many different words I used in this section. Okay, this is like just a brief summary. I don't call it a method, not even an approach. I think it's just like a procedure, right, that I used during the lessons with the dyslexics. So the first step was always visualizing. So I would introduce vocabulary and even grammar rules or phrases by just using pictures. So they would see the pictures or the images or symbols. I would say the words related to those symbols. I would have them repeat the words as many times as possible. And because repetition helps dyslexics to internalize information, right? And then they would associate the images with the words and the sounds of the words they were saying and the meaning of the words, because they would get them, they would know the meaning by the pictures, right? And after associating the pictures with the words and sounds, they would use it like many times. They would reproduce it by saying phrases, like an example, like with the like icon from Facebook. They would tell me things they like. I like chocolate. I like soccer. I like my family. I like books. I like films. So they would use it many times with different words in different situations in order to acquire the phrases or the vocabulary. And I would always revise those contents. I would always review them, because it's important to constantly recap content, because they end up forgetting everything or most of it. And as I told you, during the project, we didn't deal with written language because the focus was on oral language, since I believe that, I mean, when you want to know whether someone masters a language, we don't ask them if they write in that language. We don't ask people, do you write in Mandarin? Do you read in Mandarin? We ask them if they speak Mandarin. So I truly believe that, okay, we do write texts, we do communicate by using messages, texting messages, but I think languages are meant to be spoken. So our classes were all about speaking, listening and speaking, right? But I believe that oral language can be a bridge to written language, but I think that students should first learn how to speak and then write, because this is what happens in our lives when we learn our mother tongue. We first learn our mother tongue, we first learn how to speak it, and then we go to school to learn how to write it. And finally, considering that dyslexics have low memory retention, we can also use memory games to help them internalize vocabulary and content. I use this a lot during my project. This one is, in this one, I was focusing on adjectives. So Tara, can you hear me? Can you choose a number, please?
14.
Okay, right. So this symbol here, this emoji here represents an adjective, right? Which is hungry. So students would have to tell me the adjective or make a sentence by using that adjective. For example, I am hungry. Now they would need to find the other hungry emoji. Tara, please.
Number 2.
Oops, sorry. There we go. Wow.
Wow.
You're really good at it. Okay, so after finding the other hungry emoji, students would have to make another sentence using that adjective, or they would simply have to say the adjective, right? But if they got it wrong, I would cover both images again, and the next student would have the chance to find a pair, right? So they would have the chance to revise vocabulary, to recap vocabulary, and use it and say it a lot of times. And as Tara said, it doesn't feel like learning. You're learning, but it doesn't feel like a class, like a lesson, because we are teaching them in a way that they don't notice they're learning. They don't notice they are being taught, because it sounds like fun and not actually like a school activity. So from my experience, games help a lot, especially memory games when it comes to dyslexic people. I think this is all.
All right. Thank you, Elerson. That was wonderful information.
There we go.
So we will send out the recording of the talk if anyone wants to share it or watch it again. And we'll have another lecture in the series 2 weeks from now, which is, let's see, June 23rd. We also will have Taylor's lecture next Tuesday, June 14th at 2 p.m. So hopefully we'll see some of you there with Taylor to talk about internationalization. And thank you all so much for joining us this morning. And we will see you next time.